the law was explained to me. It was a very tough law for the suppression of counter-revolutionary and espionage activity. According to that law, you could be shot for a number of crimes in that connection. And but there was an interesting provision in the law. The law stated that if, before your crimes were discovered, that is, before you were arrested, you voluntarily surrendered and made a full confession of what you'd done, unless it was a blood crime, and unless you killed somebody or something like that, you could be allowed to go scot-free. Or, if it was very serious, you could be given a minimum or mild sentence. If you didn't do that, if you'd been arrested, then you were faced with a choice. You either went through, and this is assuming that it wasn't a blood crime, because if you'd killed somebody, you were liable to be executed. But if it was anything less than that, you had a choice. You could either make a full confession and undergo reform, or if you refused to confess and refused to reform, you would be tried by a military tribunal and taken out and executed, if that was the punishment that they felt was appropriate. So I, of course, at first tried to deny things, but it's pretty silly because, as I said, when you're a foreigner wandering around China, you're pretty obvious. They knew a great deal about me. The big question was they didn't know how much they knew about me. You know, that there could have been more that they didn't know about. So they pushed pretty hard. I was interrogated night and day. First I tried to, and very skillfully, I'd been an interrogation officer myself during the war. I interrogated Japanese prisoners, so I had some idea about techniques. And they kept me completely off balance. And I started out by trying to deny admit what I knew they knew and deny what I thought they didn't know. The problem was that after a while I got so confused I was admitting things I swore I'd never admit and denying things that I'd already admitted. And finally, after about 12 days, I said, to hell with it, and just gave a full confession. And then I was ordered to write out my confession, which I did. I spent something like 87 handwritten pages writing out my confession, most of which was to explain to them that it really wasn't my fault, whatever had happened, and that I wasn't a bad guy. Then I was told I'd have to take part in reform. Incidentally, I rewrote my confession every year. I was told to rewrite it. I wasn't told what to say, I was just told to rewrite it. Second year, I thought, well, you know, I'm in for this far, I might as well give them go whole hog. So I accepted blame for everything. I was willing to accept the blame for the Korean War if that was necessary. And I got that one bounced right back to me. They said, this is stupid, this is dangerous, you can hurt other people as well as yourself. And what we want to know is just exactly the truth and nothing more. In the third year, I redid it. By the fourth year, I was down to 12 pages. I just stated what I'd done and when I'd done it, and that was it. No excuses, no rationalizations or anything of that kind. And it was important to them that you do a confession that was absolutely right on the money, because they're not pushing it too far, not accepting blame for things that weren't your fault. Because, as they pointed out, if a man steals $99, but you accuse him of stealing $100, the one thing he'll think about is the $1 he didn't steal, not the 99 that he did, and use that as a rationalization for resisting any kind of, criticism or reform or what have you. So I did the confessions. And then I took part in this reform, and the reform consisted of a process, something like group therapy in the United States, except it wasn't as well controlled. We sat around as a group, and the cell that I was in was about 8 by 10, and about 2/3 of it was covered by the wooden platform, about 2.5 feet off the ground. And on that we would roll out our bedding and sleep at night, and we'd sit cross-legged on it during the day. And there's a little space for walking up and down, and there was a bucket as a latrine in the corner, and we got the major latrine call twice a day, and we got fed twice a day. All we wanted to eat, the food was simple, tended to be rough grains, either millet or they had a steamed cornbread that we would get, and then we would get vegetables in soup, and the vegetables varied as the seasons went by because they didn't have refrigeration and things like that. Actually, in the wintertime, it was mostly Chinese cabbage, and I can tell you, you got awful sick of Chinese cabbage by January and February. But that was the diet. But it was essentially a healthy diet. Conditions in the prison were terrible when we first went in. This was an old Kuomintang prison that had been taken over by the communists. When I first went in, they ran it pretty much in the traditional Chinese, the way traditional Chinese prisons were run, and that is you appoint a cell leader, a tough guy, usually the meanest, worst guy in the whole place. You appoint him as a cell leader, and then he maintains discipline in the cell. Out of that, he gets all sorts of perks. Anything that comes into the cell in the way of food or something like that, he gets his share of, and so on. But it was a good way of controlling the prisoners. Later on, they did away with that system once they began to really get control of things. Another thing was that the rats and were all over the place. We were covered with fleas and lice and bed bugs and we didn't get baths. We could wash. There's a little wash basin. We could bring in water and wash, but you didn't get baths. Didn't get haircuts, and of course my beard was pretty long. I managed to keep my mustache down by chewing it off, but that was about the best I could do. It was a pretty bad place. But after the first year, there was a big health movement in China because of the threat of germ warfare in Korea. And they really cleaned up the place. We divided ourselves in the cell into ground observers and attacking force to go after the flies and bugs and so on. And we knock them down and we put them in a bottle and run competitions with the other cells to see who could get the most. And it was, suddenly we were taking baths and getting haircuts and bath about once every 6 weeks. That may not seem much, but I can tell you when it happens, it's pretty good.
So one thing I wanted to clarify, it sounds like this was kind of what we would call today lockdown. So you essentially never left the cell?
We did. After the first year, we would get a couple of times a week to go out in the courtyard as an individual cell. Remember, this is a maximum security prison. We were not supposed to know who was in any of the other cells. And because, there were espionage networks and all sorts of things going on. So this was a maximum security detention quarters. Now, and it was primarily for the processing of cases. Most foreigners actually stayed there the whole length of their sentence rather than being sent on to regular Chinese prisons or prison farms or whatever other form of punishment there might be. So it was a very tough prison. Oddly enough, the door was made of wood, lattice wood with just a bolt. And in the early years, they didn't know what to do with the children of women who were there. I mean, if they had relatives, they placed the children with. But if they weren't, they didn't know what to do with them. So the children just stayed in the prison, and the children would go wandering around, opening doors and coming in and talk to you. And you wouldn't think of trying to escape because they told you, quite frankly, you can escape anytime you want to. This is not it isn't that impossible to escape. But if you do, we'll have you back within a very short time. We'll shoot you. No question about it. That's it. And so none of us tried it.